The word tariff has been used in conjunction with the Trump administration ever since he took office, and that's just the way the president wants it to be. After announcing his plans to reciprocally tariff goods coming in from several of the country's trading partners, Donald Trump has inadvertently started a trade war with China, Canada, and Mexico. Trump's plan is to, arguably, strong-arm the nations into giving the United States a better deal on trade. But is his plan paying off? We're talking about waging a war against the top three trading partners of the United States, overall making up more than a third of American trade, and they're not ready to back down without a fight. Did Trump start a war he couldn't finish? 25% tariffs on goods coming in from Mexico and Canada, and 20% tariffs on goods coming in from China. Just a few months in office, President Donald Trump has already kick-started a trade war, severed diplomatic ties, and issued cause for concern for many economists in the United States. But did it all stem from nowhere? No, Trump's tariff plan wasn't something that he just came up with out of the blue one day. The Trump administration has been pushing for reciprocal tariffs for the longest time, dating back to when Trump first assumed office as the 45th president. Now, as the 47th president, he's determined to see things through. In his words, he's determined to make sure that the United States isn't stiffed or taken advantage of any longer by its so-called trading partners. Back when Trump was still the Republican Party's presidential nominee, he held an appearance at the Economic Club in Chicago. There, he made a pretty interesting statement.
I always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary.
He should have clarified this a bit, because to Trump the most beautiful phrase would have been reciprocal tariffs. That is, the United States would only tariff goods coming in from other nations in the reciprocal amount that they tariff US-made goods. To simplify this, if Canada is taxing the US 25%, the US would be taxing the same amount. Tariffs aren't necessarily paid by the nations that are sending those goods, by the way. That would have waged a trade war unlike any other. No, what happens is that the tariffs are applied to whoever is receiving those goods in the nation. Think of any multinational in the United States, Walmart, Target, Amazon, you name it. Obviously, not all of their products are sourced exclusively from the United States. If a tariff is applied to goods coming in from one of their source nations, they would be the ones who pay the surcharge or the tax. This leads to two things. The very first and direct result would be raised prices. Anything that used to be sold for $10 would now be sold at $12 to make up the difference that the sourcing agency paid in taxes. The second result, and the one that the Trump administration is hoping for, is that the sourcing agency drops foreign-made goods altogether and chooses American alternatives. Last, but not least, the origin country itself. Seeing how their trade is being impacted would reduce the tariffs they applied on US goods. See, reciprocal tariffs. Once the origin country reduces its tariffs, the US would reduce its, and then maybe, just maybe, the sourcing agency would go back to importing their goods. All in all, it sounds like the Trump administration really thought this one through. However, there are a few other aspects that we're not considering in this example. For one, why specifically Canada, Mexico, and China? Yes, reciprocal tariffs apply to any of the US hundreds of trading partners, but what is it about these countries that has the Trump administration going in guns blazing? Continuing on with the timeline, just a few weeks after he was announced victorious against the Democratic nominee Kamala Harris, Trump announced the tariff plan. Back then, his biggest motivation wasn't to make the US entirely self-sufficient, it was to send a message. While President Trump gave both Canada and Mexico ample opportunity to curb the dangerous cartel activity and influx of lethal drugs flowing into our country, they have failed to adequately address the situation, according to a statement released by the White House shortly before the tariffs took effect. The only goods that won't face a 25% tariff from Canada are energy-related items such as crude oil, one of the top goods the US imports from there. Instead, they'll be subjected to a 10% tax. Fresh produce, cars and car parts and electronics, including phones and computers, are among the top goods the US imports from Mexico, Canada and China that will now face tariffs between 20% and 25%. Trump claimed that 25% was a small price to pay for Canada and Mexico because they'd refused to secure their respective borders with the United States. As far as the 20% tariff on China was concerned, Trump voiced his frustration with the nation for allowing the free flow of fentanyl into the country. He believed that this would send a strong enough message to the three nations, prompting them to take action. Well, it did, but maybe not in the way that the president had hoped. Obviously, the three nations weren't going to stand back idly and watch as Trump announced blanket tariffs on their goods. Again, just a few months into office, and Donald Trump has more than ruffled a few feathers. World leaders have expressed their unease with some of Trump's policies, with the French president correcting Trump midway during a press conference on Ukrainian funding. Elsewhere, other world leaders have expressed their willingness to work with Trump. The Israeli president, Benjamin Netanyahu, has expressed his relief that Trump is now in office, believing that he'll be the best ally for their war against Hamas in the Middle East. Even if Trump's solution is to convert the Gaza Strip into commercial real estate, prompting widespread criticism. There's also the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, who believes that trade between the US and India will reach new heights now that Trump's assumed control. But then there's also Justin Trudeau, who couldn't be more frustrated with the direction the United States, once a close ally of Canada, is taking under Trump's rule. Trudeau made an official address speaking to the US president directly, stating that there are no winners in a trade war. He expressed his dissatisfaction with the blanket tariffs and reminded Trump that a trade war with Canada was the last thing he should do. Trudeau's hardline approach is to be expected. Trump's been more than vocal with his unhappiness over how Canada's conducted business with the US. According to the Trump administration, it's the country's so-called allies who've been taking advantage of the US for the longest time. Trudeau stated that the nation wouldn't back down without a fight, and the best retaliatory effort was a tariff of its own. That's probably why they call it reciprocal tariffs. The Canadian Prime Minister stated that they would be implementing a 25% tariff on $20.7 billion in US goods effective immediately. Trudeau gave Trump a 21-day period during which he hopes the president would back down. If yes, the tariffs would be lifted, and if not, they would impact an additional $86.2 million in US goods. Trudeau then went on to state that the move was illegal and asserted that Canada would be challenging them by filing dispute resolution claims at the World Trade Organization and through the USMCA, a free trade agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Yes, the United States really does rely on Canada as one of its major trading partners, which is why Trudeau ended his address by calling the trade war dumb and reminding Trump that it would only serve to weaken the allies' close relationship. Dairy products, meats, grains, wine, beer, apparel, footwear, motorcycles, cosmetics, and certain pulp and paper products are just some of the US goods that will be subject to immediate tariffs, according to Canada's Department of Finance. Moreover, Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, stated that if Trump wanted to weaken Canada's economy by way of tariffs and disrupting trade with the US, the province would retaliate by cutting off energy supply to the US. Could Trump's trade war against China be part of something bigger? Apparently, yes. The country's law enforcement agencies believe that Chinese entities are critical in supplying precursor chemicals which can be used by labs in the US to create fentanyl. A huge part of Trump's stated motivation for imposing tariffs on China is to pressure those countries into exerting stricter controls on the flow of fentanyl into the US. According to the DEA, more than 107,000 people lost their lives to a drug overdose in 2023, with nearly 70% of those deaths attributed to opioids such as fentanyl. To better understand the growing epidemic, take a look at this graph prepared by Statista. It shows the number of drug overdose deaths in the US from 2000 to 2023. 75,000 deaths were reported in 2023 alone. To put this in perspective, the US lost 58,220 people in the Vietnam War, meaning that fentanyl and similar drugs are now taking more American lives each year than that war did in more than a decade. The problem is very real, yes, but is China to blame for it? China's State Council Information Office published a document outlining the steps that the government has taken in recent years to control the production and distribution of fentanyl-related substances. China believes that the Trump administration only wanted to find an easy way to impose tariffs on Chinese goods into the United States. Could Trump's trade war with China be a part of something much larger? Trump has framed his proposal for massive tariffs on China as a response to the fentanyl crisis, but this justification appears to be a convenient cover for broader economic and political motives. Tariffs have long been a cornerstone of Trump's economic policy, and his renewed push seems more about reviving his America First trade war than addressing drug trafficking. Fentanyl primarily enters the US through Mexico, often via cartels using precursors from China, making tariffs an effective tool for combating the crisis. Instead, Trump's real motives are likely to appeal to the people who voted for him. By framing China as a direct villain, he tapped into lingering frustrations over job losses, trade imbalances, and even COVID-19. Additionally, he may see tariffs as a way to pressure China on other geopolitical issues, such as Taiwan or technological competition. Given his past use of tariffs to leverage in negotiations, he could also be laying the groundwork for future deals or personal financial interests. Trump's China tariff plan seems less about stopping fentanyl and more about reinforcing his political brand and economic agenda. Whatever Trump's motivations might be, the fact of the matter is that China, similar to Canada, isn't about to let the United States wage a unilateral trade war. Of course, retaliation was coming. In March 2025, this came in the form of retaliatory tariffs, with China imposing a 15% tariff on American chicken, wheat, corn, and cotton imports, according to a statement from the State Council Tariff Commission. Additionally, a 10% tariff was placed on sorghum, soybeans, pork, beef, aquatic products, fruits, vegetables, and dairy. Beyond tariffs, China's Ministry of Commerce added 15 US companies, including drone manufacturer Skydio, to its export control list, restricting Chinese firms from supplying them with dual-use equipment. China announced further restrictions, including halting lumber imports from the US, suspending the export permits of 3 American soybean companies, and launching an anti-dumping investigation into specific fiber optic imports. Back when Trump was running for his first term in office, he made the bold claim that not only would the US-Mexico wall be completed in the next 4 years, but that Mexico would be footing the bill for it too. Obviously, Mexico's then president rebuffed Trump for the claim, implying that he wasn't thinking straight if he believed Mexico would be paying for anything. Fast forward to Trump's second term in office, and he's determined to see the border wall through. Admittedly, he hasn't made another claim so far on who will be fitting the bill for it, but it'd be a fair guess that he knows Mexico isn't willing to budge. That being said, Trump still believes that the neighboring nation needs to pay in one way or another. Tariffs, 25% to be specific. Claudia Sheinbaum has now joined a long and growing list of world leaders who've expressed their dissatisfaction with how things are being run in the White House. The Mexican president announced, just like China and Canada, that there would be retaliatory tariffs on American imports into Mexico, as well as non-tariff measures. She believed that the trade war was unnecessary and a misstep by the Trump administration, restating the belief shared by her contemporaries. This isn't going to end well. On that note, let's talk a little about how tariffs would impact the average American. Despite America's economic resilience, new tariffs come at a fragile moment. Consumer spending unexpectedly dropped in January, inflation remains stubbornly high, and consumer confidence has plunged, marking the biggest early-year decline since 2009. With consumer spending driving 2/3 of US economic activity, these trends are concerning. Job growth is also stagnating. Unemployment claims are on the rise, and federal layoffs under the Trump administration could disrupt local economies. Meanwhile, Trump's immigration crackdown threatens key industries like home building and agriculture. The National Foreign Trade Council warned that tariffs on Canada and Mexico risk a trade war with close allies, raising costs for businesses and consumers. Trump, however, remains defiant, threatening immediate reciprocal tariffs if Canada retaliates. With steel and aluminium tariffs set for March the 12th and more on the horizon, including potential agricultural tariffs, Trump's trade policy could further strain the economy, impacting inflation and American households. And Mexico isn't willing to pay the price for Trump's miscalculation. Mexico is one of the US's largest trading partners, and tariffs will drive up costs for American businesses and consumers, particularly in industries reliant on Mexican imports like agriculture, auto manufacturing, and construction. Higher prices on everyday goods, from food to electronics, will only worsen inflation. Mexico has imposed retaliatory tariffs on key American exports, targeting industries in states that strongly support Trump. These include levies on agricultural products like corn, dairy, and pork, sectors that heavily depend on Mexican buyers. Additionally, Mexico is diversifying trade relationships, strengthening ties with other nations to reduce reliance on U.S. goods. Mexico, Canada, and China. The United States' top three trading partners make up 15.9%, 14.3%, and 10.9% of trade with the country, respectively. Trump's reciprocal tariffs run the risk of disrupting over a third of the U.S. trade altogether. Is it a gamble worth taking?